Hey everyone, this is Wyatt Hammond, the producer of the Industrial Real Estate Podcast. I wanted to take a quick moment to share an exciting update with you all. As the podcast continues to grow, we've decided to launch a brand new YouTube channel exclusively to the Industrial Real Estate Podcast. This new channel is where you'll find all of our future episodes, categorized past episodes, and all of the content you come to expect. So if you're currently subscribed to Chad Griffiths on YouTube, we'd really appreciate it if you'd take a second and head over to the new Industrial Real Estate Show and hit that subscribe button. This will ensure you don't miss any of the upcoming conversations, insights, and deep dives into the world of industrial real estate. We're excited about this next step, and we'd love to have you along with us. Just follow the link below this video or search for the Industrial Real Estate Show on YouTube and look for our new channel. Thanks, as always, for being part of the community, and we'll see you on the new channel.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Industrial Real Estate Show. I am pleased to be joined by Professor Tim Minshall, who wrote this book, How Things Are Made. And I'm going to go on record and say this is my favorite book of 2025. You'll see as we go through it, I dog-eared a lot of pages. I've made tons of highlights. So it's an honor to interview the author. But before we jump into the book, Tim, thank you so much for agreeing to jump on the call with me.
Chad, it's an absolute pleasure, and I'm so flattered to hear that you enjoyed the book. That's wonderful news to me, and my publisher.
I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I know that it was actually written originally under a different name, if I'm not mistaken. Your Life is Manufactured, How We Make Things, Why It Matters, and How We Can Do It Better. So if someone were to come across that, are there still that book? Okay, so very similar then, very similar to it now. So did you just go switch publishers, or what was the change there?
So it was originally, it is a book aimed at UK readership, and I thought, and that's where it would be targeted. And so we had a publisher for the UK, but then a US publisher came along and said, we're interested in this as well. And I said, does this mean I need to, do that transatlantic thing of changing the spelling and sidewalk, pavement, all this? And they said, no, it's absolutely fine. We just want you to change the title of the book, because they felt that How Things Are Made was a better title for that market. So I went, I'll absolutely defer to the experts. So we have basically the same book with two different titles. And only very occasionally I get a rude comment on Amazon saying, I've just bought this book. It's exactly the same as the other one. And you go, yeah, it's the same book.
That's good to know. I might have to see if I could find a copy of the other one, because I am legitimately a fan of it. And I think that was a very smart move that the U.S. publisher made on that, is because there is a fascination in North America with how things are made. There's television shows. There was one, I think it was actually called something to that effect, of how things were made. If you go on YouTube, you'll find a ton of videos where people can go through factories and see how things are made. There is a big fascination with it. And that's actually a spot that I'd love to start on this. To get, you mentioned this in the prologue, there is a line, as I planned the contents, I started to realize that I had some glaring gaps in my knowledge on some specific aspects of manufacturing. This was partly the result of something that affects all of us, and it has a name: the illusion of explanatory depth. I think that's a great spot to kick this off, because as much as we all have a fascination with how things are made, I think that there are those inherent gaps in our knowledge. Can you tee that up a little bit more on what that is, the illusion of explanatory depth?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's definitely not something that I created. I read some papers on it because I thought, is this a thing? And other writers have written about it. It's this basic idea that we go, do you understand how, how a computer works? And people go, yeah. There's, like a chip and memory and stuff and a keyboard and a screen. And okay, so how does what's the processor doing? Oh, well, it's processing data. So yeah, it's processing stuff, and it kind of does stuff. So what's going on inside that processor? Oh, well, it's something, I think there's binary stuff happening. There's like ones and zeros. And you go, right, how does that work? We can't do it. If you're a computer engineer or electrical engineer, you can, but I would struggle with that. You get to this point where you go, yeah, I'm comfortable explaining roughly how it works. And you go further level down and it stops working. You just go, no, honestly, I don't understand how that bit works. Now, they talked about examples like, how does a toilet flush? Now, some people listening and watching may go, I totally know how that works. A lot of people don't. They'll go, well, there's some sort of a lever you push and then the water level comes out. And yeah, but how does that work? Where's the pressure difference coming from? Oh, yeah, I don't know that. So it's this idea that we can convince ourselves and be quite comfortable saying, I know this much and that's all I need to know. But sometimes we need to push further and we need to get beyond that illusion. We need to recognize it is an illusion. We don't know what happens behind the scenes. And in some cases, we probably should. And there's this idea that a lack of knowledge is actually quite stressful when something goes wrong. It's that feeling when, your computer's failing or your car breaks down. If you're not an automotive engineer, it's quite scary because you go, well, I don't know what's happened here. So I think manufacturing was one of those things where I think we should all know, and I didn't, we should know more about it than we do at the moment. And everybody's different, but knowing a bit more is probably a good idea, because when things like the COVID break in our supply chain happened, when the Panama Canal gets kind of running out of water and things stop arriving, or the Suez Canal getting blocked and things stop arriving, if you're doing a big construction project, this really matters. But knowing how likely it is that could happen and why it's going to happen actually gives you a chance to plan for a different future and say, well, we probably should have plan B. There's a reason why we need plan B and plan C. So that's basically where it was coming from. That makes sense?
It does, yeah. Very well said. How is it similar, or perhaps how is it different from the Dunning-Kruger effect, where people have an over-exaggerated sense that they think that they know things that they perhaps don't?
Yeah, it's very similar. Illusion of explanatory depth, I think, was more about technical things, that it's literally understanding mechanisms and processes as opposed to just general Dunning-Kruger, which I think is more about knowledge. I got it right. It's a specific example of one is a specific example of the other.
So as you started going down this journey, where you were at that beginning of the journey, I suppose, of not fully understanding what manufacturing was and its importance and its role, and then how bottlenecks can impact everything, what was the start? I know that you looked at grocery stores, and that was a fascinating tale, that now average grocery store might have 30,000 SKUs or stock keeping units. How did you really embark on the journey of figuring out what manufacturing was so that you could put together this comprehensive book?
Well, it's a great question, because I once I'd realized I was going to do it, and just as a tiny bit of background, there were two drivers for this. One was elementary school kids. So we used to do lots of talks for elementary school kids, and we'd go out and we'd explain these things because we thought it was important. And, as a university institution, it's important that we engage with our local community to show why we exist and, talk about careers and things like that. And it was great because, 5 to 11-year-old kids are really smart, no filter, and you get the best questions, and you really have to be on your A game to deal with them. And that was fine. And that's, character building stuff. But what was particularly alarming in some ways was the parents and teachers coming along. And if it had gone okay, they'd say, well, thank you for that. That was not too terrible. Thank you for coming along. But they'd add on, I didn't know that. And I thought that's, we don't know, not everyone knows everything. And I thought, oh, wow, they didn't know that. But then I didn't know much about this before I took this job. I thought, well, does that matter? And I thought, well, probably it does, that we don't have an understanding of how things are made more generally and what it means across the economy. That was one thing. The second thing was COVID, and just that moment of, like, you and I living in relatively wealthy economies and going into a grocery store or a mall and seeing empty shelves for the first time during COVID and going, well, that's unexpected. I didn't think that things were that bad, and that was bad enough. But we know why that happened. It was a bullwhip effect because supply chains couldn't align themselves more quickly enough, and toilet paper became this sort of iconic product that had disappeared. And what was going on with that? And I'll come back to that in a minute, if I may. But it was then comments from very smart people saying, well, if things aren't being delivered because we've got supply chain problems from China or wherever they may be coming, why don't we just make them locally? And there was this pause when we went, well, we can't, because most of our manufacturing capacity in the UK, or a significant proportion, through the 80s and 90s, was shifted to China. So you can't just start it up again. It's not like there's been idle factories waiting to be switched back on. It's not like there are workers who've just been waiting for the last 20 years doing something else who can now come back. We've lost that that process knowledge, that ability to make things. Now, we still have quite a lot in the UK and quite a lot, across the whole of North America. There's loads going on, but certainly there's less than there was before. And you can't just switch it back on. And that's what was alarming. I thought, wow, so we've got to be better at explaining that. And so the example we'd use, I thought, oh, great, I'm going to have the best time. Now that COVID's over, I can travel again. I'm going to go and visit electronics factories and pharmaceutical companies and aircraft companies. It's going to be so cool. I thought, I'm not ready for that. I need to understand something really basic, because if you understand the very basic thing, then I can see how complexity makes the same thing harder. But if I don't understand the basic thing, it's going to be a really bad bit of explanation. And the most basic product I could think of, or one of the most basic, was toilet paper. I thought, right, I can hook that back to COVID, but most of us actually know how it's made? It's basically a product with two components, some sheets of paper and a cardboard tube in the middle. How complex can that be? And then you start to break it down, going, well, hang on, what's it made from? It's made from wood fiber. Okay, well, where do the wood fibers come from? And they go, oh, hang on a minute. You want, without getting too graphic, you want paper that is strong and soft. So if you want softness in your wood pulp, you need fibers from trees that grow in warm climates. And if you want strength, you want fibers that come from trees grown in cold climates. So what you need to do is spend about 40 years growing trees in different parts of the hemisphere, and then chopping them down and chipping them up and pulping them up, taking the water out, shipping dry wood pulp to a location, adding the water back in again, going through a fantastically complex process using these massive machines that are more like a building than a machine, where you are spraying and heating and rolling and crimping and quilting and doing all this stuff that consumes huge amounts of energy to deliver sheets of toilet paper. And it is incredible the amount of water, the amount of energy, the distance traveled to make something as simple as a roll of toilet paper. Then I thought, wow, if I can understand that and see how complex that is, now I'm ready to go and look at cars and ships and planes and drugs and all of these things to see how the supply chain for something that is not just got two components, paper and a cardboard tube in the middle, but a typical car with 30,000 components. Maybe an electric vehicle is simpler. It's only got 15,000 components, all of which could be made in different factories and shipped around with highly, highly skilled workers and quality and costing things going on there. And if you scale it up then to an aircraft, so an older one like a 747, it's got about 6 million components. And yes, modern aircraft with more composite fiber, they have fewer rivets, so there's probably only 2 to 3 million components. And all of those have to be manufactured perfectly and quality controlled and shipped to the right place at the right time to be assembled in exactly the right way. And you just go, whoa, all of this is going on. And then you've got all of the logistics. And I went to visit container ports to just go, well, I visited quite a small one, which only has 4 million containers going through it a year. It's relatively small. And just the ballet, the dancing, the poetry, getting a bit carried away here, of a modern container port is extraordinary. And there are hundreds of these around the world, and this is happening 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. All of this is happening, and it's largely invisible. We just don't even see it. We see the trucks on the road, we see a few containers on the back of trains, we see aircraft flying overhead, the odd ship on the horizon. We don't really get to feel that we are part of this manufacturing world. So anyway, getting a bit carried away here. That's why I wrote the book, and that's how we got started, by just start with something simple. Can I convince myself that I understand how one product is made, such that I can then share examples that go a bit further down the complexity chain?
I love it. I love the enthusiasm for something so innocuous that most of us would never think twice about, of a roll of toilet paper. You might assume that that's made at a local factory and just delivered to the grocery store where you pick it up, and that's the end of it. But to dive into it and really explore all the nuance and all the things that have to come together in that perfect symphony to deliver it is really amazing. And that's something as simple as just a roll of toilet paper. When you start looking at a modern cell phone or an airplane or a car, you can start getting a sense that every one of those components likely has a supply chain and value chain as complex as a roll of toilet paper. But So what was there an epiphany that you had when you started going through the toilet paper, saying that this is much more complex than anybody realized? Or was it also one of those things where you've come to realize that maybe most people are just blissfully naive, that this happens, and maybe they don't even, they're just like, yeah, it's, as long as it gets to my door, I don't care. I don't care what happens.
Yeah, it's a great point. And so there is that moment whenever I'm giving talks about this stuff as part of the day job, but also with the kind of the book thing. There is that logic moment where you go, okay, so we don't understand it. We don't see it. Thank you for explaining it. Why should I care? So, nerdy bloke from Cambridge has explained that, manufacturing is complicated. Now, how is my life better as a result of that? And there's a number of ways of thinking about it. One of them is just this general sense of understanding, but also because it's become invisible. It's a bit like sticking with toilet paper related things, the sewage system. Now, our whole plumbing and sewage system just is there. In a city, we know it's there. If you stop and think about it, you go, that's quite complicated. How do we ensure we have good sanitation, clean drinking water? We just assume it's there, it's done. And we don't ever notice it until, there's a pipe bursts or something happens, and then it's a massive problem. Most of us have, myself included, no idea how that works. So and you could say, well, again, it doesn't matter because some smart people will come along and fix it. But actually, there's another element to this, which is regarding manufacturing as being this other thing, this thing that's hidden away and we don't really care about it, is quite dangerous. And by that, I mean a number of things. So when we had, as I said, the COVID example, we ran out of face masks and surgical gowns and ventilators and all sorts of things for ICUs. The fact that smart people working in positions of power said, oh, we can just start manufacturing again. That was worrying. You thought, no, nobody in a position of seniority should be able to genuinely think that manufacturing is this thing we've lost quite a lot of it, we can just switch it on again when there's a crisis. Unfortunately, with the way the world is going at the moment, and being in Europe, not far away from here, there is a major land war going on, and we very much hope that will be resolved, but it has reminded us of the need for national security and national resilience. And for that, the absolute sad truth is you need manufacturing capability. You need sovereign capability to make sure you've got steel, to make all the things that are needed to allow you to defend your citizens. And so that's why I think knowing about it's quite important. But there's another angle, which is if, I'm being in Cambridge, UK, there's a lot of innovation here. We're a kind of a mini version of Silicon Valley, that we've got a whole load of things going on here, lots of billion-dollar companies being created. But the truth also is, if we want innovation to be successful, you don't just need the people who are really smart at the science and the technology. You also need to be able to make these products. And often in the past we've said, well, that doesn't matter. This making can happen off screen. It can be somewhere else. That doesn't matter. Others are fine at making that. We'll focus on the beginning bit, the science and the technology and the design and the quote, clever bits. The rest doesn't matter. That's completely wrong. What you need is, and the example of China expresses this beautifully, and there's a wonderful book by a guy called Dan Wang called Breakneck, which is, yes, it's a great story of how China has grown over the last 50 years. But the bit I find most interesting is the fact that he talks about communities of engineers, where you have the people who understand the production working closely with the people who understand the development and the science and the technology, and you can iterate much faster. It's not that you can just say, we've done the clever bit, we chuck it over a wall to people who will make it. No, it's absolutely about the tight coupling of the science and the technology and the design with those who are going to make it. And if you do it and you couple it, you make better products quicker. There's evidence clearly to show this, and examples from China, the time it normally takes to design and build a new car, several years. 3 to 4 minimum, probably slightly longer. Xiaomi, the Chinese former consumer electronics company, produced a new electric vehicle, having never built a car before, in 2 years. And that's 2 years to selling it in volume. You go, because they have all the production close by. They can iterate very, very rapidly between that. And again, this ability to recognize that the making of the thing actually informs the designing of the thing, which is then resting on the technology. And so we found this, the engineers and the scientists here in Cambridge who are really good are the ones who understand, in order to make this product useful, to make this system useful, you've got to understand how it's going to be manufactured. So that's why I think it's so important. It's not just it's partly it would be good if we all knew a bit more about it and overcame our illusion of explanatory depth. But I think for the COVID reason, for the defense reason, and for the innovation reason, we need to be better, more appreciative of what manufacturing is and why it matters.
That's a wonderful answer. And if we could even go back to the 70s and 80s when developed countries started exporting everything to China, and China now being the world's factory, its name is often given, that was a conscious effort in the 70s and the 80s. And there was multiple parts. There's China that was deliberately trying to attract it. There's also North America and Europe that were trying to cut costs, and it made sense to go to a low labor cost market like China. In looking at it, and it's very difficult to even answer this question, so maybe it's just giving your high level thoughts on it. Was that a mistake? Was that a mistake exporting all of this manufacturing capacity to China for ostensibly the main goal of just saving money and cutting costs?
There's a simple and there's a complex answer. Maybe the simple one is it was a rational economic decision. I'm not an economist, but I believe there's something called externalities where you go, well, that's just optimizing what I do, and there may be some collateral damage, but that's not my problem because I don't have to pay for it. And so I think the moving of things of some manufacturing to countries better able to provide the service at the cost and quality that was needed makes absolute rational economic sense. I think it was not appreciated of the long-term consequences of that. And again, back to that Dan Wang book, he talks about technology being considered as three different things. There's technology as tools. Anybody can buy a CNC machine or any machine they like and just plug it in, and there you go. There's instructions, which is, okay, in order to make this machine work, you need to do these things. But the most important bit is the process knowledge. How do we use this to do a thing? How do we, over time, build up the skills and the capabilities to allow us to use this machine to its optimal as part of a system of other machines, as part of a factory, as part of a supply chain to do a thing. That process knowledge is very, very human. And so I think the logic was, that's okay, we can just send some machine or get our partners overseas in a lower wage cost environment to have the same machines. We can send them the instructions, but we'll still have the process knowledge because we developed that. And if it was just a quick transfer and then a quick back again, like 3 or 5 years later, probably would have been okay. But this has been a decade, 15, 20 years, an entire generation of workers whose jobs were lost because we moved manufacturing overseas have moved on. They've retired. They've gone on and done other things. So when you try and bring it back, it gets very tricky because you can have the same machines, you can have the same instructions, but you need the process knowledge. And we've lost that. And this is where China has been superb at building up that process knowledge and clustering it in places like Shenzhen, where it's just right there. You've got this incredible ability to say the machines, the instructions, and the people with the process knowledge are all within, half an hour to an hour of each other. You could say, yeah, we can still access the process knowledge from North America, from Europe. It's, we can, modern technologies, we've got jets, we can do all that. It's not the same. And I think as we talk, certainly in North America and in Europe, about bringing more stuff back from China, and there are some who want it done very quickly, it's really challenging because we've lost that understanding that process knowledge sits within people, and even more importantly, sits within communities of people. So I think the longer answer to your question is, so the short answer is, it made economic sense in the short term. The long answer is, no, I think none of us, myself included, appreciated the long-term consequences of what was happening. It was a decision based on static knowledge. We said, it is lower cost now, therefore we can move it over there because we assume the cost will be roughly the same. But of course, the costs went up and the skills and the capabilities went up and actually pulled more manufacturing over rather than less. That's, I think, where it started to unravel a little bit.
I'll say it somewhat facetiously, but I think a lot of politicians and business leaders think in quarters, or perhaps they think in election cycles. And if you go back to the 70s and 80s when they started making decisions to export a lot of things to China and other countries, it was, how does this help me in the next quarter? How does this help me in the next election cycle? As opposed to, what does this mean for the manufacturing base in 2025? I doubt that there were many people thinking that far out. So I suppose it's one of those things that you go back and you say, well, they were probably just doing the best that they could with the information they had available at the time. And there is very little forethought to what are the long-term implications of bringing this all to another country. I guess that leads.
Yeah, but I think.
Go ahead. Yep.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think I don't want to be pointing fingers at anybody, because in a way, the manufacturing community, people like me, we needed to be better at explaining the value of manufacturing. And you may say, yeah, well, even if they'd understood it, they still said yes, but in the short term, these industries are declining. Our wage base is too high. The only thing we can do, we either shut the factory down, shut the company down completely, or we accept that production can happen elsewhere. There's a totally rational approach to that. But I do think we kind of lost the narrative of manufacturing, that it is important to our lives. It is, everything in our life is being manufactured somewhere. And it's not just about, resilience to a shock like COVID or a war. It's actually, if you have manufacturing in your economy, there's direct and indirect value to that. Manufacturing jobs tend to be jobs that are, the good manufacturing jobs tend to be the ones that are highly skilled, require a lot of training. So once someone's invested in training someone to be good at manufacturing, you want to keep them. So they tend to be more secure. You then have resilient communities because they tend to be quite localized. And that's a good thing. So you have then the community colleges with the manufacturing companies tying up nice and tightly. They can evolve and change because, of course, technology changes. We then move out of one sector into another. But in the past, we've just gone, that thing isn't needed anymore. It's too expensive here. Let's ship it out. Rather than saying, let's try and help adapt what's going on there. The situation in Germany illustrates this very well. Very strong manufacturing economy. They have no problem explaining what manufacturing is and why it matters, but they still need to invest and are investing huge amounts of money in transforming to new areas. The whole situation with European car makers, triggered by the, extraordinary performance of Tesla, and now the extraordinary performance of companies like BYD, is making those European companies go, oh, we do manufacturing in automotive is an essential part of what we do, but it is changing. We're not going to just give up. We're going to have to transform that manufacturing. But the roots are so deep, they can do that. They can retrain, they can reskill, they can adapt. They just need to do it quite quickly.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the main discussion happening at every one of their internal board meetings right now, is how they deal with that. I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that does lead to a very important point, is that there is an appetite to reshore. That I believe at one point, this going back even a couple of years, when analysts would start going through board of director meetings and annual reports, reshoring was one of the most popular words that came up resoundingly across the board. Every company was talking about either reshoring or onshoring or friendshoring or some variation of that. And I think it's for the reasons that you mentioned. The people internally, without those that haven't given a lot of thought, hopefully they change their mind after listening to you speak on this, but that most people haven't given a lot of thought to it, but the companies have. But there's still a lot of inherent challenges in bringing up that process knowledge. There's still a lot of having that body of work. There's still labor challenges. There's still capital investment challenges of the companies still need to actually make the investment to bring a plant back to their country, train the workforce. Are there even workers available? Are they competitive enough that now the price has to change just to make it comparable to where it was before? I'm guessing there's a lot of these inherent challenges that you've come across as you started looking at saying, yes, okay, we get it. Manufacturing is important. We need to do it. How do we do it, though? And is that there an unbridgeable gap between knowing that you need to do it and actually doing it?
That's a great point. And I'm glad you introduced it as it's not a binary decision, bring it all back. That's overly simplistic, and that it can't be like. I mean, technically it could be like that. That's a very ambitious strategy. So instead, we've seen lots of this moving the manufacturing around to de-risk it slightly, and that is dealing with some of the issues there. But if we do say, is there a certain amount of manufacturing that any economy needs to be resilient, to be secure, to have equitable employment, all of these things, to have good jobs? You can look at examples like Singapore and Switzerland. I know they're tiny countries, but they have absolutely seem to have got a very nuanced view of, yes, Switzerland, known for, certain service activities and financial services, and they do that incredibly well. But they're also one of the strongest European countries for manufacturing, and manufacturing value add per capita is incredibly high because they have advanced instruments, their pharmaceutical, plastics industry, their precision engineering is at the heart of what makes Switzerland what it is, in balance with a very strong financial services sector as well. Singapore, similarly, a great balance across manufacturing and services. And so there is something about having a balanced economy. There's no magic number of how much it should be, but there's a certain amount needed. But we can't all do everything. This isn't about returning to isolationist states and saying, we should all be able to make everything, and then global economics breaks down. But there's something about specialization and saying, okay, as a nation, what do we want to be good at? And to do that, and manufacturing, the answer is always there will be some manufacturing in this country. And if we do accept that, we say, well, that needs long-term infrastructural investment in the form of building up, providing a trading environment where suppliers work very well. There's a good IP regime that we know that we're not, things can be protected. We know that we have a skilled workforce, which is probably the most important bit, a skilled workforce and a skilled network of suppliers to make sure if we do want to continue to grow, in the UK's case, stronger sectors for us would be some aspects of automotive. We have a lot of automotive companies here, particularly motorsport. It's very, an awful lot of the F1 teams still have their core operations in one small corner of the UK. Pharmaceutical, it's a bit tricky at the moment with some of the issues around tariffs. Medical devices, aerospace, we're particularly good at bits of that. So is it that a country like the UK, I'm just using it as an example because that's where I'm from, you just say those are the manufacturing sectors we're going to really support. And we're going to take your point about political cycles and quarterly reporting and say, for the nation's good, we should be investing in our automotive workforce, in our aerospace workforce, in our pharmaceutical workforce. We should be doing that and accept that if we do that, we're not going to be investing in some other things as well. But this is where it gets tricky because it's easy for some nerdy bloke in a university to say, we should do that. But it's all about cost. And, the public revenue, do we have enough money to do this? But I love the point you made about this has to sit beyond individual political cycles. This is something that is so important. It sits there along with, healthcare and defense and these things that you accept are a cost and you need them. You expect them to be funded, even if they're, in some ways a burden on the economy, but you accept it. You go, no, but we have to have defense. We have to have health. We have to have a police force. We have to have these things. I think manufacturing in a selective way sits in a similar category because if you don't have this idea of industrial commons, actually this one, which is, so, in villages and back in the day, there was common land and everybody could use the common land for grazing their animals. And everybody benefited from it, but it had to be there. And if somebody messed it up, then everybody suffered, so you go in and fix it. The concept of industrial commons says exactly the same. You've got to have a certain level of skilled workers and suppliers in your economy that everybody benefits from. And yes, you are recruiting from each other and, poaching and headhunting, but overall the system works. When you take away the manufacturing, there are no industrial commons. There's no backbone of suppliers. There's no people queuing up with the skills you need. They've gone on and done something else. So that's the bit that's really hard to recreate quickly, the industrial commons, particularly the skilled workforce. And that's why if any nation says we're going to bring more back, it's a long-term investment in the supply base, the commons particularly, and the skilled workforce.
Yeah, that's so much to digest on that. Because I
Right,
agree
rather long.
completely with you. I think that that's such a profound point. And you and I can sit here talking about this, and hopefully people listening are like, "Yep, we understand that this is imperative." Is there a gap right now between, and I guess we just go back to that political cycle and business intent? Is there a gap between, perhaps they know it as well, perhaps there's a politician out there or someone in high office or somebody that's leading a company that's saying, yeah, we need to actually do this, but as you mentioned, this is a 5-10 year process. By the time a company goes and does a business case for it, and then does site selection and identifies somewhere that works, and then builds a business case so they can raise financing and actually go and do it, and then build the plant and get workers and get things going, that could be a 5 to 10 year process.
Yep.
Whereas the companies might be saying, we've got quarterly reports coming out next month, and that's got to be our focus right now. And similar to the politician might be saying, I plan on retiring in the next, at the end of this term, so I don't want to take this on right now and risk all the mental capacity that this would take. Is there still going to be that? I think the answer is probably yes. So maybe even just moving past that, how do we get past that? How do we get past that inherent gap between knowing that needs to do something and then actually going and doing it? Have you come across a roadmap or any best practices or anything that you would recommend to a company or to a government to actually go from saying manufacturing is important, we know why we need to do it, here's how you do it now?
Uh, thank you for framing it that way. Yeah, the answer is yes, it can be done, and yes, it's going to be difficult. And I love the acronym NIMBY, not in my backyard. Well, the other one I heard, which relates to your point, is NIMTO, not in my term of office. I like that. So just that idea that, yes, this is the right thing to do, but I'm not willing to do it because it'll be a massive cost to me and my chance of re-election. And the person who benefits from it will not be in my term of office. They'll be outside it. So that's a NIMTO decision. And I'm not criticizing those who, lead on policy. It's a really difficult, incredibly hard thing to do because everything's about trade-offs and you have to operate within the system that you're given, right? But I think there are some nice examples where, well, I'll do the negative before the positive, if I may. One is certain companies go, we're going to lead the way. We recognize that this is really important. We're going to invest in the workforce. We're going to absolutely be the trailblazers. We're going to be at the vanguard of building up the manufacturing workforce. We will have the most skilled workers. And what you hope is that others will go, oh, if they can do it, we can do it. The reality is people standing behind you go, oh, they're doing all the hard work of training the workforce. We just wait for them to get them all trained up, and then we'll just pinch them. We'll just take their workers. And you can see that's not, it's quite a rational thing to do. Why bother to spend all the time investing when you can just recruit the ones that someone else has developed for you? So there's a real issue around trying to differentiate the altruistic and the selfish. And what we find exciting is some of the privately owned companies are in a better position than the publicly owned companies. So that if you are doing quarterly reporting, if you've got all your shareholders going, yep, fascinating, 10 years, jolly good, I want something now, I want my returns. It's very different if you've got a company that's privately held who can just go, we're going to be patient here. We're going to do the thing that will build strength for this business in the long term. And then just some slightly random positive examples of this, which might be a bit peculiar. So my dress sense is, I'm just a humble engineer. I don't understand high fashion at all, as you can see. But we've been working with some companies who are in luxury goods and high fashion. And what's fascinating about that is that they absolutely invest in long-term workforce development. So these companies that are making exquisite products that cost, I will never be able to afford them, no matter what I do. But they're investing in products that require very, very highly skilled workers, and they invest in generations of workers. So if you look across sort of northern Italy and bits of France and Germany, incredible networks of highly, highly skilled artisans forming a supply chain that go right the way up to the big fashion brands that see in magazines. And that's incredible. So they absolutely said, we are privately owned companies. Our job is to make sure we do the best job possible for our customer. And we know to do that, our customer's not going anywhere. The best thing we can do is to invest in our workforce and make sure we have generations of employees coming forward. See this in Japan. There's a lovely example. I think, if I'm going to quote his book again, I think it's also from Dan Wang. I may have got it wrong, about the idea of the manufacturing knowledge being possessed by people. Possessed by people? That didn't sound quite right. Inherently a human thing. And they talk about the approach to Japanese temple building as opposed to the European approach to temple building. Bear with me. I know I'm sounding a little wacky here. But, the European cathedrals and churches, they're built and they have and continue to be aimed at lasting centuries, if not millennia, right? You build strong as you can and you make these things out of stone and you want them to just never go away. Japanese temples typically have a life cycle of about 20 years, but they'll say this temple has been here for the last 1,000 years. But every decade, couple of decades or so, it is, not all of them, some of them are rebuilt. But to do that, you have to have people who understand what's going on. So the construction companies have invested in the idea of using the old language, expert or master, journeyman, apprentice. And you move up that scale as you go through your career. So when you're building a new temple, the master is in charge and there's a journeyman, person who is responsible for actually doing the stuff, and some apprentices who are learning for the first time. Then next time you build it, the master's moved on and this person has moved up, new apprentices have come in, and the knowledge of making things is a humanly transferred cross-generational thing. But that's just cultural. That's what you do. In a perfect world, I'd love to think we could get back to that. We could actually learn lessons from the world of luxury goods, the world of temple building. I know it sounds a bit out there, but I think there is really important. We do look at other sectors that aren't traditionally regarded as normal manufacturing, because there's great lessons to be learned. One last example, if I may, the construction industry is a good example of this. So we have, some elements of construction are not very innovative. And I use these words because that's exactly what was described to me by people working in construction. And they have said, because the way in certain European countries like the UK, very, 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 very fragmented stack of supply chain. Everything is outsourced to other people. So there's no incentive to invest in workforce development because it's not your problem. You're just going to bring in a contractor to do every single bit beyond the top bit. But there are some companies that have retained vertical integration. And those are the ones who say we can do something about the skills issue. But all of them recognize, whether they're disintegrated or integrated, that the world of construction is changing and has to get better. And it's the companies that are more integrated who at the moment can say, we're actually well positioned for this because we're investing in what we do now and we're investing for what's going to be here in 10 to 20 years' time. And companies like, as an example, Lang O'Rourke in the UK and Iran and Australia and elsewhere have been very good at this, of saying we're investing because construction is a form of manufacturing, in our workforce for how it is now and how it will be in 10 to 20 years' time. And we just need, I think, more companies who think like that, which is incredibly easy for me to say, but does require a slight change in shareholder relationships.
That was my next question is, does it happen? Do you anticipate more companies adopting that mentality? Or is the appeal of cheap labor and cheap manufacturing in China and other countries just too irresistible that it prevents or inhibits this massive reshoring back to the UK and North America?
It's a really good point. I think I don't wish it on any nation, but I think sometimes a crisis can help with this. And I was surprised, certainly from a UK perspective, maybe different elsewhere, that I thought COVID would be a reset. And we'd go, oh, that was actually quite a problem. We want to not do that again. Let's have a bit more domestic capability built up. We haven't seen a huge amount of that. It was almost as if, well, that was a crisis. Now we're out of the crisis, so we can go back to where we were before, which is a little bit of a worry. There's that side to it. Nobody wants to extrapolate the consequences of the situation in places like Ukraine and elsewhere getting more complicated. But that would, I think, accelerate this dramatically. And so I think there's got to be some external, as I said, there are a few companies who do this. There are a few countries who do this really well. But for the rest of us, I hate to say it, and I don't want to say it, but it's almost as if we need some kind of burning platform crisis moment. We go, no, this has to change. Now, being an optimist, I believe that the threat of bad things happening is sufficient to make us all now go, oh, actually, given geopolitics at the moment and the critical role of semiconductors and where and where the high-end ones are manufactured, I think that is driving some change. And I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. But unfortunately, there's collateral issues that go with that, that's definitely above my pay grade.
Well, mine as well. But it does speak to the geopolitical tension going on right now, and how any one thing well beyond any of our control or ability to predict can completely derail it. And we saw it with toilet paper kind of coming full circle to that. The semiconductor one is interesting because the US specifically has been spending a considerable amount of money bringing in semiconductor capacity into the US. And I think that's for that exact reason. They're trying to get ahead of escalating geopolitical tensions in that area. And I think that also can make sense where it's high product, high value goods. So they can make sense of bringing that in. Do you see an opportunity to reshore low cost goods, knowing that manufacturing is still very important? And maybe this area isn't important. Maybe this component of consumer goods will always be made offshore where it's cheaper to make. But something as simple as a pen. Do you see there being an appetite to bring that back to UK or America or Canada, when you might be able to get this pen for $1 by having it made in China, whereas if you bring it to one of our countries, now it's $5. Do you sense that there's going to be some component of the manufacturing space that there just isn't a case to be made that it actually makes sense to do it in the first place?
It's a beautifully articulated question, the answer to which I think is very nuanced. And I suppose one way of looking at it is to say, no, if someone is, it's the theory of comparative advantage. You do the thing that you're best at. And if with your cost base, it makes no sense to make goods that are tiny margin that can be highly automated, and you just go, well, again, there's the automation versus people issue as well. There's that side to it. There's another angle is you could say, okay, take that pen example. Should the UK be involved in the mass production of plastic pens? I don't know. Say, for example, no, purely from do we want to have the ability to manufacture pens in the UK or in Canada or in the US? But if we say, do we want to have the ability to do precision injection molding in high volumes? You go, well, yes, because a lot of the things here are very similar to the components of, a reusable medical device, like an inhaler or something like that, or a syringe or an EpiPen or something. So you may say, as a nation, yes, we do. But is it economically viable to us to set up a mass production line for making, low cost pens? Probably not. So this is where it gets very complicated about this idea of national sovereign capabilities. How do we decide what we're really going to need? And it won't necessarily be that thing, but that knowledge of how to make things like that could be useful over here. So it gets very tricky very quickly. And it's this, it's just the most annoying thing that engineers say. When we say things like, you see, it's a complex system problem. And everyone goes, yes, a complex system problem. Very good. It's still a problem. We're still going to fix it. But we sort of stop at that level of, it's a complex system. Yeah. That wasn't a very helpful answer, was it?
Well, it is, because I just looked at the time and I can't believe that we're almost at an hour already, because I had so many questions to ask you. But I think that is actually a great answer, because it does lead into, you talked about that a lot in the book. And as I mentioned at the top, I highly recommend your book. It's How Things Are Made. Another topic that we didn't have a chance to get into too was sustainability, which that also leads into a lot of the discussion. And if you're up for it, I'd love to have another conversation, perhaps even next year, because I think that there is a lot we could dive into. But does it make sense with this pen, not even considering the cost for a moment, but if this pen was made in China, does it really make sense for this pen to be made in a factory that then went by truck or rail to a port, which then traveled all the way across the ocean to then get to a port in Canada, to then go by rail or truck, to then go by a delivery truck, to then go by a last mile truck to get to my door? Is that really the most efficient and economically viable way of getting me this pen? And I don't think it is. I think the only reason it makes sense is because it was cheaper. And there's that trade-off we have to make between cost and those externalities that you mentioned at the beginning. I think that I'd love to explore that more. I know you've got a student that's coming to your door any second now, but I did love your answer, because I think that ties into, we've covered a lot of yes, manufacturing is very important. There are ways to do it. There's elements we could do it. We didn't get a chance to say, oh, how do you do it, and what are some of the other things? So that's a lead-in. You got to go and buy Professor Minshall's book and explore it some more. I'm very sensitive to your time, and I did promise you that would have you off here right away. Any last comments? Anything that, and I know we didn't cover a lot, but anything that you'd really want to conclude with? Any point that you think wraps this all up neatly?
So, thank you. First of all, thanks for having me, and I'd be delighted to come back and talk more about those issues around sustainability. But the quick answer there is, there's two different things. Often it does make sense to make things far away. And if we have to make things far away economically, one thing is, including the idea of natural capital being part of the equation rather than just, GDP, and saying, no, there's an environmental cost to that pen traveling all that way. So that should be reflected in the price. That's one argument people are putting forward. Very complicated to do that. But if we are going to move things, you mentioned that every one of those journeys is slightly polluting. Well, if we had zero emission vehicles, would that argument still hold? If you have zero emission ships, if you have hydrogen or electric trucks going around, if you have low emission planes flying stuff around, then it's less of a problem, right? It doesn't, that the assumption is if you move more than, any distance, it's probably going to be using fossil fuels, and that's going to create pollution. Well, what if that wasn't the case? So this idea of, if you have to move it cleaner. But there's another argument which says, well, that's going to be a way off. Let's see if we can't move shorter distances. And that's coming in back to your point about resilience and all those good things. But there's a whole bunch of issues around moving us more towards a manufacturing system that is better for the people, better for the planet, but also better for shareholders. It actually is, it's more efficient. You make more money from doing this. And a lot of this has to be about not ignoring the fact that we need shareholders to invest their money into manufacturing firms and know they'll get a good return, but to do it in a way that isn't harmful and which also leads to long-term benefits. We need to manufacture better things, and we need to manufacture better.
Oh, great closing comments. Professor Minshall, I loved it. I can't believe how fast that hour went. I could easily talk to you for another hour, so I'll reach out to you offline and we can set up part 2. But in the meantime, check out his book. It is fantastic. I highly recommend it. Professor, thank you once again so much for agreeing to spend the hour with me.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much, Chad. It's been a real pleasure.
Well, I'll let you go to your next student and look forward to the next chat.